Hey there, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess with So Many Creations. In this video, I'm gonna walk you step by step through my Getaway Extra Large Tote Bag. Take a look at this. This is extra large. This is one of the biggest bags that I have. It's fantastic for travel, works great as even a diaper bag or an overnight bag, whatever you want. It has a really great double zipper, which we will go over in the video. Inside, it is chock full of pockets. There are pockets all along the sides here, 2 zippered pockets, 1 on each side, and it is a monster, but it's actually an easy sew. And one of the best things about this, you can pull everything you need from your stash because you don't need any hardware. A yard of zipper, some cork for the top if you want, that's what we're gonna use today, and some fabric and interfacing of your choice. And as a bonus, I have on the website the addendum for the Getaway Junior. So this is a small purse size bag, perfect for everyday use. It's a little on the larger side for a purse, but if you're like me and you carry way too much stuff, it's the perfect size for you. So in this video, we're gonna walk through the extra large version. If you want to purchase the pattern, any of the supplies that I show, including the canvas, the cork, the zipper, you can find it right here on my website. If you also would like to purchase the addendum for the smaller one, you can do that there as well. That's going to be on the patterns page. If you are a Facebook group member for the So Many Creations pattern dedication group, you can find the information in the files section. So just by joining my group, or if you're already a member, you can actually get access to it for free. We have many files in the group, just a bonus to say thank you for being part of our fabulous community. If you are not on Facebook and you still want the addendum, you can totally get that. This is just a 25% smaller bag, so it's not a necessary purchase. If you are comfortable scaling patterns on your own, you will have to scale down not only the sizes of your fabric, but you'll also have to scale down the templates. But if you are comfortable doing that, you can totally do that. If you like videos like this, don't forget to click subscribe, hit the notification bell, and give it a thumbs up. All right, let's get into it. So I've already gone ahead and done all of my prep work. I cut and fused all of my pieces. I also used my templates to do my trimming. We will discuss the templates in just a bit, just so you know why the pieces look the way that they do, in case you haven't done that step yet. All of my outside is going to be a quilt weight canvas with some cork. On all of the canvas pieces, I interfaced with Decoville Light. I typically used a core bond, but I chose the Decoville Light. I really like the body that this gives, plus it interfaces beautifully. One thing to note before we get into all these pieces, they are large, and a lot of times when you're interfacing, it does take a little extra time, not just because the pieces are large, but I find that, again, depending on what interfacing I'm using, sometimes I just have, you know, a little bit more of a struggle to get it to stick. One of the tips that I will give you is to use a t-shirt press if you have one. If you don't have one, a pressing clapper works great. That is why I use the Decoville Light, because it adheres really quickly and really smoothly. I just really like how that came out. It is 17 inches wide, so you may notice on some of the pieces that there's multiple pieces of interfacing. That is not a problem. You can do that whenever you need to. I don't sew it together. I actually just overlap it a tiny bit. You might not be able to see, but there is about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch overlap. I try not to butt them up next to each other because then you can get permanent creases. So let's go through all of the pieces that we're going to use for today. I have 2 A's. These are going to be for my outside, front and back. Most of what we're doing, you will see that you have doubles, because almost everything in this bag, not everything, but almost everything, we're going to do twice. We have our front and back, we have 2 zippered pockets, 2 handles, etc. So these are my A pieces, all trimmed and ready to go. I trimmed the bottom corners using my template, and we will also talk about that. I have 1 B. This is for my gusset, and I've gone ahead and trimmed that one as well. For C and D, there are a couple options in the pattern. You can use whatever you would like. You are not required to use cork for this pattern because the cork pieces are actually going to be sewn into the seams. The handles will be a little bit different than they would be if they were cotton, but you do have some options. I chose to do cork for the top and the handles. I love how that looks. So for C and D, I picked 2 cork pieces. I trimmed 2 of those for the C's, and I have 2 interfaced lining pieces for the D's. You'll notice in the pattern, it will tell you that if you're using all fabric, just to mark 2 of them C and 2 of them D. That way there's no confusion when we get to making the zippered top. So I've got those ready. I did not interface my cork. I chose not to. Same goes for my E handles. In the pattern, it will tell you to interface the cork as well. Because this is a very large bag and it does get a lot of wear and tear, I like to add some interfacing to the handles, even when they're corked, just to give it a little bit more body. I did skip it for this one because I know that this is just going to be a sample for me, and I know that I did not need to do that extra step, and quite frankly, I'm lazy. So I just said, I'm not gonna do it. Yours, you can interface. If you're going to interface the cork, you will have it kind of roughly centered just to keep it out of the seam allowance and away from the edges. So I have 2E for my handles. We don't need any hardware. Let me turn these around. So now onto the lining, I have 2 F pieces. These look just like my outside. Those are interfaced as well. I am using the Essex linen in color black. So it is kind of picking up gray on camera, but it's actually a black and white weave. I have my G, which is my gusset for the lining. That is all set and interfaced. For the pockets, I have 2 pieces cut for H. These do not have interfacing. None of my pocket pieces do. These are going to be for the 2 inside divided pockets. We'll have 1 on each side. And I have my 2 I pieces for the 2 inside zippered pockets. Again, there'll be 1 on each side. So let's take a look at the templates. In the back of your pattern is going to be a couple of pages that have the template pieces. So this one right here, this is the easy one, template 2. This is just going to be for trimming your bottom corners. So let me grab one of my lining pieces. So this is one of my F pieces. And what I did is I cut my rectangle, I fused it, I took my template and I just set it on the bottom like this, and I'm just cutting my curve. Same thing over here, I just kind of flip it over, or if you want, you can fold your piece in half and just cut one time. Depends if you're using a rotary cutter or scissors, whichever you're more comfortable with is fine. I used my rotary cutter because one thing to keep in mind, yes, there are templates and yes, we need to fit some pieces together. However, this bag, because of the size and the curves, is super forgiving. If your pieces are off a little bit, we can ease in the curves, or if we end up adding extra pleats anywhere, it kind of looks like it's supposed to be there. So don't be super, crazy about it. You don't have to get really, really precise. Do the best that you can. If your pieces are printed to the actual size, when you print your pattern out, you'll be just fine. If they're off by a tiny bit, not the end of the world. So I used template 2 to trim on my A's and my F's. Those are all set. And now let's go ahead and take a look at the gusset. Let me grab my gusset here. So this right here, I think it's even too big to fit on camera, so I'm going to do it sideways. This is my B, so this is the outside. I also have one for the lining. And this is a full width of fabric that has been folded in half after it's interfaced. So I always start with a rectangle or a strip of fabric. I get that all prepped and ready to go. I would rather just cut the fused, the interface piece of fabric than to cut interfacing and fabric and hope they fit together. I just like to do the interfacing first. So once I have that done, I took my 3 template pieces. You have your top and your bottom, and on the middle one, you'll see there's a little extra piece on this end, as well as this end. There's a little dotted line. You're going to cut that piece a little bit larger. That gives you room for adding your top and bottom and for your tape. So you're just going to line those up. There's my dotted line. There's my solid line. You're going to align those where they tell you to, add some Scotch tape, and then you just place this right on the fold like so, and you cut. If you would prefer to cut with scissors, go ahead and mark. If it's more comfortable for you, open the whole piece up, mark half, flip it over and mark the other half. It's whatever works for you. And since we are discussing cutting, just one little extra note I wanted to give you. On these pieces right here, especially on canvas. On canvas and some of the quilter's cotton that you will use, sometimes lately they have been overkilling it with the selvages. The selvage on this on one end was almost a solid inch. Be very careful. You do have enough room to get your two pieces cut, but I would suggest opening up your fabric, laying it flat, cutting one chunk, cutting the next one, because if you try to cut with them folded, a lot of times you're going to end up with some of your selvage in here. Sometimes it'll go into the seam allowance and it's fine, or you may cut and think that the pattern is incorrect or you don't have enough fabric. Don't short yourself. Just open up your piece of fabric and measure it very carefully. You can even kind of double check before you get your ruler and your rotary cutter. That is one thing that is kind of bugging me lately, because a lot of the fabric is getting bigger and bigger with the selvages, and I want more fabric, less selvage. So before we start putting our bag together, let's also go over the other tools and supplies I'm going to be using. Like I said, there's no hardware for this bag. There's no adjustable handle or anything else required. You can always add a handmade tag or add some different features that you would like to, but the pattern itself just needs zippers. So I have my 2 zippers right here for my inside pockets, and I also have my longer zipper right here for my top. Now, I did not put my zipper pulls on because we're going to go over, again, I've done this in a few videos, but I don't know which ones you've seen. So I'm going to show you how I put on 2 pulls to make a double zipper. I love doing a double zipper on this bag. Here is my sample, and I just love how that looks. It really makes it easy to access and easy to open. So that is really the only hardware, if you even want to call it that. For this pattern, I also have my zipper template. Because I'm putting in zippered pockets, I'm going to be using that. I cut my pieces with my ruler and rotary cutter. Of course, I have my scissors, seam ripper, my turning tool, just in case I need that, a marking tool, and some snips. I have lots of clips, as I always do. And I have my 1/8 inch double stick tape. For the inside zippered pockets, I typically use 1/4 inch wide fusible tape because I'm working on cotton. But because this is going to work really well on the top zipper, I'm just going to use this on the pockets as well. It really doesn't matter, and you can use whatever you have on hand. And last but not least, let's talk about how I'm setting up my machine. This pattern, as well as the rest of mine, are domestic friendly. So I'm going to be using my Janome Skyline S9. So I have my 9014 Microtex needle already in. I am using Aurifil 40 weight cotton thread. I'm going with black because the navy cork is actually so dark that it almost looks black, and I think this will work really nicely on the lining as well. For the outside, there's really not a lot of top stitching, so I can always change it if I need to. I have my 3 favorite feet that I use whenever I'm making a bag. I have my E zipper foot, I have my O 1/4 inch foot, and I have my G blind hem foot, which I call my 1/8 inch foot. That's going to be what I top stitch my handles with and do any other 1/8 inch sewing. So now that I've got all the supplies that I need, let's jump right into the pattern. In your pattern, step 1 is going to be fusing. And since we've already done that, we can go ahead and skip right on to step 2. So in step 1, it does tell you that even if you're using cork, that you want to add some interfacing to the back. The reason I do that is because this is a large bag and it can get heavy when you start putting all of your things in it. Sometimes cork has just a little bit of a stretch to it. So I typically put interfacing because it's so big and I want to make sure that my handles don't stretch. I know that this is going to be a sample, so I did not put any interfacing on for today. I skipped over that for this video. But just so you know why, and so that it was not a mistake. So in your pattern, it's going to give you the 2 options, to do cork handles or to do cotton handles. We are not going to go over cotton handles today. I did not cut any for you. But basically, if you haven't made a cotton handle before, each of your handles will be wider. These are actually half the width of cotton. So you would have 2 very wide pieces. They would be interfaced on the back. You would mark the center and fold it in half, fold your raw edges in and fold one more time. So the only raw edges you have left are at the ends, and then you top stitch. For cork, we can skip that and just go right to the machine. And all you're going to do with cork is just fold your handle in half like so. You're going to top stitch on both sides, and I like to do whatever I do on the left on the right. So I'm going to do probably 1/8 and 1/4 and 1/8 and 1/4 on this side. If you don't like the raw edge, if that is not something you're a fan of, what you can also do with your cork is find your center and make a line on the back and you can just fold each of your edges in like so, and then you can do your top stitching. If you do it this way, you will also have to stitch in the middle to hold these edges down. I'm just going to fold it in half and do my stitching. I'll come back and show you how those look. Handles are all done. I top stitched 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch from each side. And then because I had a few little frays like this one, I did just run my lighter along the edge of that. I do still have the raw edge of the cork on here. I'm not going to trim that until it's time to put it in the bag. I just let my threads kind of just sit there until the end. So these are all set. I'm going to go ahead and set these aside. Step 3 is actually cutting with your templates, and we just did that. We already talked about that in the beginning. So we're going to go ahead and skip step 3 as well and move on to step 4. Step 4 is going to be adding the pleats to your outside pieces. In your pattern, it's going to give you some measurements. You're going to be measuring from the right-hand side and making 2 lines, as well as from the left-hand side. So in order to make the pleats, it's actually very simple. What you're going to do once you have these put together, or drawn, I should say, is you're going to fold, aligning those 2 marks. So there's my 2 marks right there. I'm just going to line those up, and I just like to add a clip, and I'm going to line them up here, just like so. And then what I'm going to do with these pleats is fold them this way. So they're going to be folded on the inside line towards the center. So let me do that one more time for you. So I've taken my 2 marks, I'm folding to align those. The inside mark, the mark that's further over, I'm going to bend and fold just like that. So now my 2 marks are together. I have 2 pleats that look just like that. So let me go over that one more time so you can see, and then we'll talk about where you're going to sew. So again, here is how my piece looks on the inner facing side. I drew 1, 2 marks. 1, 2 on this side. I'm measuring from the side. So I measured from the right and from the left. I'm going to bring these marks together, interfacing sides together. So I'm going to fold just like that. There's my 2 marks meeting up. Once I have that done, I'm going to fold towards the middle, and I'm folding on the inside mark. So there is pleat number 1. Pleat number 2, I'm going to fold on that line and fold inward. So when I'm done, from the back, both of my marks are together. From the front, my pleats are going inward. So now that I have my pleats folded, I'm just going to head to the machine, and I'm just stitching up at the top about 1/8 of an inch just to lock those in place. I'm not doing anything on the body of the bag, just up here. So I'm going to do that on both of these, and I'll head right back. Both of my pieces are pleated. In your pattern at the very end of step 4, it's going to give you a measurement. Now that you have made this a little bit smaller, just take this over to your cutting mat, kind of straighten that out, and measure from end to end to make sure that it is the measurement provided. If it is not, you may have some issues at the end getting your pieces to fit together, so it's better to make adjustments now. So that's how it looks on the back. Again, there's my lines touching each other. There's my back, and both of those are all set. So now we're going to move on to step 5, and we're going to add our handles. For step 5, we're going to be adding 1 handle to each half of the outside front and back. So I've grabbed one of my canvas A pieces and one of my finished handles. I've already gone ahead and I marked the center at the top. We're going to be placing our handle 6 inches apart. So the 6 inches is going to be inside the handle, and your handle will end up sitting just slightly in on your pleat. It'll be just a little bit into the pleat. So I'm just going to take my handle and I'm going to place it here. I've already done some marks for myself, and add a clip. And then I'm going to very carefully make sure that I don't twist my handle, and add my other part over here. And I'm just checking to make sure that it's not twisted. Once I have that in place, I'm going to do the same thing with my other half, and I'm going to stitch up on the top about 1/8 of an inch to lock those in place. And a quick little note before I head over to the sewing machine, I did trim off the selvages from my cork. I went ahead and gave the handles a quick little trim, making sure that they were the same size. You definitely don't want to sew the selvages onto your piece here. If you sew through this, it's actually a lot thinner than your cork, and the cork is kind of peeling off of here because it's a selvage. So we want to trim those right off. I did that and then I clipped them in place. So here's how my handles look. They're all sewn on, not twisted. I did one on the front, one on the back. For step 5, you're going to need your 2 H pieces. These are going to be for the inside divided pockets, and you're going to do the same thing to both of them. So I'll show you on one. So you would take your fabric and fold it right sides together, just like so, and sew right across this long raw edge, a 1/4 of an inch seam, making sure to backstitch. That's going to create a long tube. Once you have that done, we're going to press and then turn and top stitch. So I'm going to stitch both of these up and I'll be back to show you how to press and where to top stitch. So I stitched my pocket together to make a long tube, and then before turning it right side out, I took it to the ironing board and I pressed my seam open. I find that by pressing it open, it lays flatter, and also by pressing it before I turn it, it just helps it to be a little bit smoother. Trying to turn your pocket and then press, sometimes I feel like my pocket gets a little skewed, it's a little wonky, and nobody wants that. So there is my seam. So once I've pressed that open, I turn it right side out, and then when I press for the final seam, it's actually right here. It's not all the way down at the bottom. I move it up a little bit. The reason is it eliminates some bulk when I sew it in, but also you probably can't see, but my seam is really crooked because either I cut incorrectly or I didn't sew very nicely or I didn't press very well. We all make mistakes when we're sewing, so why not be able to hide it later? So now that that's all done, whatever end is closer to the seam, I call the bottom. So I would call this edge my bottom. So I'm going to top stitch on this edge. And when this gets put into my bag, it will actually be put in with the seam facing down. Nobody will know that my seam is a little bit crooked. It'll look just fine. My top stitching will be up here and my crooked seam will be hidden in the back. So I'm going to finish pressing this one, head over to the sewing machine and do my top stitching. I can do 1/8 or 1/4, whatever I prefer, and you can do whichever you like as well. My pockets are both finished. I have my top stitched edge up here. I have my seam on the back moved up just a little bit. My pockets are the same width as my lining pieces. Sometimes they'll be a little bit longer because they stretch, or if you didn't trim them down, which a lot of times I don't, I'll just kind of chop my fabric in half and trim it later. But these should be at least the same width as your lining pieces. So now that these are done, we can grab our lining pieces and move on to step 7. For step 7, we're going to be adding our finished divided pockets to our lining pieces. So you're going to add one of your pockets to each of your F pieces. You're placing that with the seam facing down, and you have your lining fabric facing up. So we're putting this on the right side. Using the measurement provided in your pattern, you're going to place it down. And I like to use my ruler. I lay my ruler right on there to make sure it stays straight. We need some extra room up here. These pockets are a little bit low. They might look a little low to you because we are also going to be adding a zippered pocket, and we will be pleating this. So once we have the pleats in the zippered pocket, it's going to get a little bit tighter at the top. We just want to make sure we have enough room to use these. This is why you did not want to also pleat these in the beginning. This is why we did those as 2 separate steps. So we had our pleating of the outside, then we did a few more steps. Now we will work on the lining and we'll get to the pleats on this. So once you have this in place, you're going to sew it in a few different spots. You're going to sew across the bottom here 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch. It does not matter. You're going to sew your sides also 1/8 of an inch. Sometimes your pocket will stretch because it doesn't have any interfacing. So I like to stitch the bottom first. If it stretches, I will press it quick and trim up the sides, making them even with my lining. Then I will sew 1/8 of an inch. And then I'll decide how I want to divide this. Do I want to make 3 pockets, 4 pockets? Whatever I want to do is fine. Sometimes dividing just in the center can be a little bit too big of a pocket and they will stretch on you. The pattern is going to show you how to do it in 3s. And remember, you can do each side differently. If you have some different needs, if you want a pencil pocket or you know, something different, you can do both sides a little bit different from each other. So I'm going to get my other pocket prepared. I'm going to head over to my machine, again, sewing along the bottom 1/8 or 1/4, trimming my sides if necessary, sewing 1/8, marking and dividing however I want. And when I divide my pockets, one last tip before I head over, I like to mark with something erasable, and I'm going to sew right on top of it, but just in case, I like to start at the bottom, I stitch up, I turn, and I come back down. Then my pocket is sewn in twice, and all of my loose threads and my knots are going to be down towards the bottom. I feel like it makes my pockets a lot more secure. So step 7 is complete. We have our divided pockets in both of the lining halves. Now we're going to move on to step 8 and add a zippered pocket. So each of our lining halves is going to have the divided pockets. I have 3 on each of mine. I followed the measurement provided in the pattern, and it's also going to have a zippered pocket. If you want even more tips and tricks on putting in a zippered pocket and making it absolutely perfect, I will link a video up here in the corner for you that will take you to my zipper pocket tutorial. It also discusses recessed zippers, which we won't be doing today, but it's always a great video to watch. So for step 8, we're going to turn our piece over. We're working on the F lining pieces on the back side, so you're going to make your markings on the inner facing. We're going to do the same thing to both pieces, so I'm just going to work on one for right now. In your pattern, it's going to give you the measurements for your piece right here, your rectangle, I should say. Your rectangle has 3 lines, and there is a width provided for you. It is going to be just above the divided pockets and essentially centered depending on how you measure them out. I use the measurements in the pattern, so my zippered pocket will be centered above this one. If you did something differently, yours may not be, and that's totally fine. You will notice that my lines are super neat and clean here. That is because I used my ultimate zipper template right here. If you don't have one, you can just use a standard ruler. And what it will mention in the pattern, and what I've mentioned many times before, when you're drawing these lines, if they are overextended and they're wider than they need to be, not a problem. All that matters is that we get the lines, we get them nice and straight, so we want to be measuring from the straight top edge, and you want to have a nice finished box when you're ready to sew. If my lines are out here, not the end of the world. This center line and these V's, those are going to be for the next part after we get done sewing. Those are going to be basically our cutting lines. So once I have my box drawn just like this, I'm going to grab piece I. And piece I is very similar. It's very similar. Piece I is almost a square, but it's not quite. It's a little taller than it is wide. And most of the time when I'm making a zippered pocket, my pieces are going to be taller than they are wide. So make sure you have the correct orientation. You don't want to turn it. You want it just like this. Again, I have Essex linen, so I don't really have a wrong and a right side, but we're going to say that right now this is right side up. I'm going to take my piece right here and place it right side down. And one of the #1 questions that I get asked all the time, how do I know how much of the pocket should be sticking out at the top? And the answer is it doesn't matter. I can do it here or here or here. It does not make a difference. I'm going to make sure that you can see the pocket just for demo purposes, but I promise you in the end, it won't matter. What does matter is that it is evenly spaced this way. So if you want to find the center of this piece and line it up with the center here, you can do that. For me, I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. The reason is I want to make sure I have enough on the side for my seam allowance when I close my pocket. Now we're not there yet, but it's going to make a difference later. This pocket piece is substantially wider than this, so we have a lot of wiggle room. On some of the other patterns, you might only have 1 inch or 2 difference, and that's going to make a really big difference if you are off-centered. So I'm just kind of eyeballing the center. It's about 1 inch or so hanging off the top, and that's totally fine. I'm going to use some pins or clips. I have my clips nearby, so I'm just going to use those because we want to make sure that our pocket stays nice and flat. And I don't see the necessity to add more than 4 clips or pins. We're just holding the corners. You don't need to pin all the way around here. I see students do that sometimes, and what you don't want to do is get in the way of where you're going to sew. So I find that the corners work just fine. So I'm going to take this to my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew just around the outside of the box. That's it. I'm going to come back over. I'm not going to take my clips out. I'm going to leave them, and I'm going to show you how to do your cutting. I stitched around the outside of the box. I did not do anything in the center, just the outside, and my clips are still in. The reason is when it comes to cutting, I don't want this pocket piece to fold under and cut it by accident. So you can use scissors or even a seam ripper or your rotary cutter. I used my rotary cutter and scissors, and I cut on the center line between the two V's, and then I cut back into the corners. Now, sometimes because of our sewing or our marking, the V's are not perfectly aligned in the corner. So I kind of ignore them when it comes to actually cutting, and I get my scissors all the way into the corner as close to the thread without cutting through it as I can. So I did my center, I cut out on each of my V's. Now that I'm finished, I can take my clips out, and I'm going to pull my pocket through to the back, just like that. And I'm gonna head over to the ironing board because I want to iron a really crisp, clean opening. So I'm gonna be folding this down, just kind of give that a little tug. Can be a little bit difficult with the interfacing, but we want to make a rectangular opening, just like that, that's clean and ready for a zipper. So I pressed my opening. I have a nice crisp rectangle. It looks good on the front as well as the back. So what I'm gonna do before I go any further is I'm gonna put my clips back in because I will need to sew as soon as I get my zipper in place. And I just wanna keep that pocket nice and flat. So I'm gonna go ahead and use my 1/8 inch tape right here. Typically on cotton, I do use 1/4 inch fusible, but there is nothing wrong with using the non-fusible tape. This is just your standard double stick tape. I buy mine from Waywack, however you want to say it. If you call their customer service and listen to their answering machine, you will hear that it is actually more Warwick than it is Waywack. That's just a weird tangent, but I'm just letting you know because I'm one of those people that likes to know. So I have my tape down. I'm going to peel my paper off. If I was using fusible tape, I would just fuse it down and then peel my paper off. Sometimes my nails are my enemy, and sometimes they are my friend. Not that time. There we go. All right, I have my tape. I'm gonna grab my zipper, and I'm gonna place my zipper right side up. Everybody always says your zippers need to go from left to right when they open. That's what I do. I don't know if it actually matters, but I just do what I'm told to do. So I've got my zipper here. I have my zipper right side up, and I'm gonna put my lining piece down on top of it. Instead of working from the back where I can't see if it's straight, I'm gonna work from the front where it counts. And get that where I want it. And once it's straight and in position, I will head back to the sewing machine and stitch around about 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch. My zipper is all sewn in. I did go ahead and take my clips back out of my pocket. Now that I have that in place, I'm gonna turn this over to the back, and here is how I close up my pocket. I can go ahead and trim some of the excess zipper, but because it's not reaching all the way to the edge of my pocket, I'm just gonna leave it. Again, sometimes you have smaller pocket areas, and if the zipper is kind of in the seam allowance, I will trim it. For this, it's about 1 inch over on each end, and I'm just gonna leave it. I'm totally fine with that. So first things first, I'm gonna take my bottom edge to my top edge right here, and I'm gonna sew 1/4 of an inch right across here. One of the most important things to remember when finishing your pocket is that this does not get sewn to this piece. So I'm going to sew 1/4 of an inch right here. Then I'm going to pull my pocket down towards the bottom of the bag where it's going to hang in the finished bag. And then I'm going to close my sides again 1/4 of an inch. I will pull them up and kind of tuck this back out of my way. I don't want to sew it to the lining piece. So once that's done, this is how it's going to look. just like this right here. There is my bottom and top seam sewn together. This is why the orientation from top to bottom really doesn't matter, because we don't care where this seam ends up. It's just for us, and really you won't even notice when you're using the pocket. So don't worry about where yours is. If it's higher or lower than mine, it's totally okay. So I've got that, I've got my sides done, and it is not sewn to the lining. So these are done, and we are ready to move on for our next step. For step 9, we're going to prepare the zippered top. I've grabbed my C pieces, which are cork, and my D pieces, which are interface fabric. I also have my zipper and my 2 zipper pulls. So before we talk about how to put this together, let's add our zipper pulls. I know that sometimes this can be a little challenging when you're putting 2 pulls on instead of 1. So let's go ahead and work on that together. So I'm gonna open up my zipper just a little bit, and I'm gonna get my first pull on. And I always tell people, if you have 2 pieces of zipper, you need 2 different sides for it to go into. So I'm just going to put a little bit in on each side. If you have a favorite tool that you like to use to do this, by all means, I just always do it with my hands. Once my zipper pull is on there, I hold it down firmly with my fingers. I wiggle and I pull until it goes on. And whenever there's a camera around, it takes longer. That is Murphy's Law. So now I have zipper pull number 1, and I'm gonna bring it all the way to the opposite end because I need to open up this end to put on my other pull. So I'm gonna do the same exact thing, except this time, I'm gonna check it before I put my pull on to try to avoid a bubble. So I'm just gonna get this started, and before I do anything else, I just kind of do a little pinch test, and I make sure that's nice and straight. Doesn't look like there's any bubbles, and it came out. We're gonna do it again. We all struggle, even when we have a YouTube channel. So this right here, I can see that is what I don't want. I'm gonna try this a little bit more. That looks pretty good. And there we go. Pretend the camera's not there. All right, there are my 2 zipper pulls. So they're going to open in towards each other because when we use our bag, we want to open it out like this. If this is too much work for you and you are just struggling too much, skip the second pull, just use a single pull zipper and call it a day. It's totally fine. You are not defeated. So now that we have this and we have our pieces, I'm also going to grab my tape and my clips. We're gonna go ahead and get this prepared. We're basically just going to make a sandwich on either side of the zipper using 1 cork and 1 lining piece. So I'm gonna move 1 of each aside. And when it comes to this kind of technique, I always like to baste my zipper in place. And when I say baste, and I move my zipper pulls to the end, I mean holding it in place. I don't necessarily mean a longer stitch length or anything like that. I just mean that I want my zipper to be set on my cork so that it's going to stay straight. I want it as straight as possible. And I find that when I try to do too many things at once, my zipper always gets a little bit crooked. So what I'm gonna do is, instead of sewing, I'm gonna use my 1/8 inch tape, and I'm just gonna run a piece of tape right along the top edge. If you have anything directional, you will want to make sure that this is the top. For me, I kind of made it easy on myself today. I don't have anything directional, and I don't even have anything with a wrong and a right side as far as fabric is concerned. There's my tape. I'm going to pull my paper off. And I'm going to take my zipper. I moved my pulls down to one end and added a clip. My pulls are going to hang off the edge for a couple of steps, or for a couple of lines of sewing anyway, and then we will worry about those when it's time to close this up. For now, they can hang off the side. So I'm going to turn my zipper so it's right side down. I want it right sides together with my cork, and I want to line it up right along that edge, nice and straight. So because I'm using tape, I don't need to do any extra sewing. If I wasn't using tape and I was just clipping it in place, now I would stitch across here about 1/8 of an inch. Once my zipper is in place and it's straight, I grab one of my lining pieces and I'm gonna put it right side down so the inner facing is facing up. And I'm going to add a few clips. And now I will take it to the sewing machine and sew a full 1/4 inch seam, making sure to backstitch when I start and stop. So I'm gonna sew all the way across here. I'll come back over and we'll add these 2 pieces, and then we'll close up the sides and talk about top stitching. First half is complete. So we're gonna open this up, and I'm not gonna do any top stitching just yet. You definitely can, but I would rather wait because I'm gonna change feet and I'd rather just change them once. So I'm just gonna open this up, fold my edges back, and clip them just to keep them out of the way. And now I'm going to repeat the same step with these 2 pieces. I'm going to add tape to my cork, or I'm going to baste it at the machine, whichever you just did, and do the same thing. So my cork is going to be right sides together with the other piece of cork, just like this. Line up the sides, get my zipper straight. I love the striped zippers, but they do have a different flex. I don't want to call it stretch, but they almost are more like fabric where they kind of move around on you. So if you don't take your time, your zipper might be crooked or it might have a bubble. Okay, so we've got that in place. So I've got my cork right sides together with cork. I'm gonna flip it over, take my lining piece, lining right sides together with lining, and turn this over. I was a little short on interfacing, so I would rather put that down towards the bottom. And clip. And now I'm ready to do the same thing. Take this over, sew it a 1/4 inch, making sure to backstitch. When I'm done, I will give this a good press, and then we will discuss top stitching and finishing. So I went over to the ironing board and I gave this a really good press from both sides. I checked to make sure everything looked good. It's nice and straight. On the back here where my fabric is, you want to be extra careful that your fabric is pressed and it's not rolling in towards the zipper teeth. If it is, it's going to get in the way of your zipper working. And if it's not properly taken care of now, down the road, your zippers can get stuck and you may not be able to use your bag. So it's very important that you press this piece really well. So before we close up the sides, I'm going to go ahead and do some top stitching. I would recommend that you don't top stitch more than 1/8 of an inch. And I do top stitch through the outside as well as the lining. Now there's a lot of debate about that in bag making, because if we only top stitch through the outside, or if we stop short on the ends, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. It will make the edges not dip down as much. And what I mean by that, let me grab my other bag here. You can see right here on the side, I have this kind of angle right here. This is caused because I top stitch through not only the cork, but also through the lining. You can see my stitching right there. I do that to keep everything nice and flat, but there are consequences. If you are going to stitch through both layers, you're gonna get that little dip. This is a very easy beginner-friendly technique. You could definitely do this with tabs or make your zipper a little bit shorter and make some accommodations. If you've been making bags for a while, you can change this to make it work for you. Make it however you like to put in a zipper. For me, to keep this beginner-friendly and to keep it simple, this is how I do my zipper. It's the same technique I've used in many of my bags, but there's always ways that we can change it, and it's always good to grow as a designer and as a bag maker. So if you want to change it up, by all means. I'm gonna leave it as is. I'm gonna go ahead and just top stitch 1/8 of an inch on either side, and then I'll be back to talk about how to close up the sides and what to do with our zipper pulls. Now that I am top stitched, I'm going to take my zipper pulls and move them both into the center of my piece. I don't want them hanging off the edge now. I'm also going to check my edges right here and do a little bit of trimming. I want to make sure that I have the correct measurement, and also a couple things have shifted, so I'm going to do a quick little trim. All right, that looks a lot better. I trimmed up my zipper and I trimmed up my edges. So now I'm going to take my cork and I'm going to pull that right sides together, and I'm going to put my fabric right sides together. I'm going to add a few clips here. just to keep this organized. And I'll add a few over here. So I've got outside right sides together, cork to cork, and lining right sides together, fabric to fabric. So we are not going to be sewing the long edges. We're not going to sew here. That's just where we clipped. That will get into a seam later, so we won't have to worry about that. What we're going to do is just sew these short ends. And again, because of this zipper technique, we kind of just have to go with the flow. Our zipper is not going to be 100% perfect, but it's going to still look good and function, and that is what's most important. So what I'm gonna do is add a clip here and add a clip here, and I'm going to take my zipper teeth. Now remember, they are still attached. If they were separate, sometimes your zipper is separate at the end. That can be a little bit easier, but because this is still zipped, we want to push our zipper teeth, which are right here. We want to flatten them out and push them towards the lining. Okay, that's gonna make the dip a little bit less. So we're gonna do the same thing over here. Add a clip, take the zipper teeth, flatten them out, push them towards the lining. You always want them going in the same direction and you want them towards the lining. Now I'm gonna sew a 1/4 inch seam, back stitch on each end, and then I will turn this so it's cork side out. So that's how my finished piece looks. What I do to press it, because I just finger press, is I just open my zipper all the way and I push my finger or my knuckle in there, just kind of push that out as best as I can. And when I zip it up, it's straight, my zipper is in straight, everything is good. I have that little dip, but you know what? It's livable, it's totally fine. So I'm not gonna press or do anything else for this. I am done for now. We are gonna move on for our next step. For step 10, we're going to start the assembly steps. And before we can start, we have to do a couple things. I have my lining pieces here. I went and made my marks on the back for the pleats. Let's go over that one more time because that's going to be the first thing we need to do. So I've got my clips here. I have my 2 lines. I've drawn them from the right as well as from the left. I'm going to fold the lines on top of each other, just like this. So it's interfacing sides together. Get those lines together. And then I'm going to fold on the inner line, just like that. So that is the second line. So when I say the inner line, I mean this one. So we're going to fold line to line and then fold forward towards the middle of the bag on the inner line. Do that with both of my lining pieces. Get those ready to sew. All right, easy peasy. So that is all set to go. I can take these over to the sewing machine in just a minute. And again, just tack those pleats in place. So I've got my zipper top done. I will have these done in a minute. My outsides are all set. I've got those done from earlier with my handles. And now I need my gussets. Those are gonna be the last 2 pieces we have left. So I have my B, I have a mess here, and G. So what you're going to do before you can start any assembly is you're going to mark your centers. This is going to be really important for a bag like this with curves, but also with something so big, it's gonna help us to start and get it lined up properly to begin with. So the first thing I'm gonna do on both of my gussets, I'm going to make sure that they are folded perfectly in half. And in the middle here, this is my fold, I'm gonna mark on both sides. So when I open this up, I've got my marks just like that. I'm gonna do the same thing on my lining, making sure that it's lined up right in the center. And mark like that. I'm using a friction pen, but it really doesn't matter since we're marking on the interfacing. You can mark wherever. For the lining pieces as well as the outsides, we're gonna mark down here at the bottom. So we're just gonna fold this in half like so. And we're gonna mark just like that. So you're gonna do that for all 4 of these main pieces. Once those are all marked, you'll be ready to start clipping. I'm gonna head over to the sewing machine real quick and tack my pleats down, and then we will start putting all these pieces together. All right, my pleats are all set. I've got a lot of stuff going on here, so I'm just going to pull one of my outsides and my gusset, and we're gonna start there. What we're going to do is make 3 different units, essentially, that will all go together. We've already finished one of those units. That's this one right here. So we have our unit number 1, our zipper top, all set. So now we're going to make an outside and a lining. So what you're going to do first, you've already got your center marks. So you're going to take your lining piece, and they're the same. So it really doesn't matter which one you start with. Okay, same with the lining. You can just grab one. We're going to line up in the middle here, these center marks, and add a clip. You can do clips or pins, you can do both, it's whatever is easier. Then you're going to take this edge right here, we're gonna bring it all the way up to the top, just like that. I'm gonna add a couple clips. Do the same over here. So it's right sides together, adding some clips. And what I do whenever I am making something with curves, I clip my straight sides first and I address the curves at the edge. And I had mentioned earlier that this bag is very forgiving if you have miscut or if you get a pleat. It kind of looks like it's meant to be because this bag is big and has these big rounded corners. So don't stress yourself if something isn't fitting very well. It happens. It happens to all of us. It could happen to me right now in this video. We are about to find out. So we're just gonna clip. And I stop at the corner. I'm gonna do the same thing over here. I'm not addressing those yet. Now I have seen people not clip them and just at the sewing machine kind of work them in. If that's what you wanna do, go right ahead. I have done it myself. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. So for video's sake, I am going to clip everything. So there's how I look so far. So now I'm going to do one of the corners, and I might need more clips in the corner than I do on the straight parts. So all I'm gonna do here is just kind of work my way around, easing that in. The Decoville Light definitely makes it a little stiffer, more so than Decor Bond. I feel like I don't have as much stretch, which may result in some pleats, and I'm okay with that. So far, that looks good. I have a little pleat right here, but if you notice when I push my fingers down, it kind of goes away. That's the kind of thing that I will address at the machine. I'm gonna come over here, and I'm going to do this corner. Just kind of taking my time, working that in. If it's fitting, but it's snug and it's, you know, got a couple of little bubbles or puckers, a lot of that goes away at the machine, and some of that will even go away in the seam allowance. So that's how that part looks right there. Now I'm ready to sew this. I'm also going to repeat this step with my lining piece. All right, and the magic of television, my lining is already clipped as well. So because I'm doing the same exact thing, I just like to get them both prepped. Then I can go to the machine, sew one, sew the other, come back over and add my other pieces. So on the outside, I am going to be sewing from here all the way around to the other side, 1/4 of an inch. If you need to do it 2 times because of the clips or if you're having any issues, absolutely. If you have a table for your machine and you haven't been using it, this is a great time to use it because it will support the weight of this. So this one, full 1/4 of an inch all the way around. My lining, I'm going to leave an opening. So I'm going to leave a nice giant opening, and I never leave my opening on the corners. I always want to address darts and curves and corners. I always want to get those done and leave my opening on a straight part because that's going to be a lot easier to close. So I'm going to leave probably a 6 to 8 inch opening to make sure I can turn this entire bag through that opening. So I'm going to head to the machine, get both of these done, and then we will add our next 2 pieces. Stitching round one went very well. I did not have any puckers or pleats. Everything worked out nicely. I have this nice big opening in the bottom of my lining for turning later. Now I'm going to repeat that process with my other halves. So I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm placing this outside, right sides together, clipping that, doing the same with the lining, except this time I don't have to leave an opening. So I'm going to get these all clipped up. Done. Okay, I'm gonna head back over to the sewing machine, sew my 1/4 inch seam on both of these, and then we'll put the last pieces together. Done and done. So I have my lining and my outside done. The lining is done for the moment. We need to do something else for the outside. So I'm gonna leave this wrong side out and just put this aside. I don't want that right now. I'm going to take my outside and turn it right side out, because to finish the outside, we have to add our zippered top. So we're just gonna turn this. I'm not worrying about pressing anything at the moment, because when it's all done, I'll press it if I need to. This is stiff, and not in a bad way. I do like the Decoville light. It's just, I'm so used to Decor Bond because I use it so much more, and it's a little bit lighter. And it's also, again, I say this a lot, it's really awkward to do certain things because I'm holding it away from myself on the camera and I need to hold it towards me, but that's okay. All right, we're almost done and I'm excited because this is looking great so far. So there is my outside. There's my handles. All right, so what I'm gonna do to finish this up is grab my zippered top. I'm gonna turn my zippered top. I'm gonna open up the zipper first, and I'm gonna turn my zippered top so the lining fabric is out, okay? So I want lining fabric out like this. Now I'm going to place this on top like so. So I'm putting my cork right sides together with my canvas. So I have that. I have to go grab my clips. I'll be right back. Definitely can't do this part without clips. So I have a center seam here, but I don't have a center seam here. I have a gusset. So there is my gusset. My gusset, I have the two sides, or the two seams. So I can find the center if I want to, but I'm just gonna eyeball it. I'm putting the center seam of the zipper with the middle of the gusset. I'm just gonna add a clip. I'm gonna come over here and do the same thing. So again, there is my center seam, there's my cork. I am placing that in the middle of the gusset. Now, this is going to be the time that things may not fit together, because even though it's been going great so far, every so often something was off and we didn't notice it. And if that is the case, you can add extra pleats. No one will ever know, and it's not the end of the world. And don't tell anybody, just keep it to yourself. Because when we point out our mistakes, most of the time people don't even know, and we don't need to do it. So I'm just clipping the raw edges. I've got the raw edge of my canvas and my lining fabric of my zipper and my cork. That half went together perfectly. It looks like it doesn't fit, but it actually is fitting great. So I'm just working my way around. We're gonna sew this with a 1/4 inch seam. And then for the final seam, which is going to have our lining, we're gonna do a 1/2 inch seam. Because there's a lot of bulk here and things shift around and sometimes they're not perfect. So we are going to make sure that everything is in there when we're done. All right, so let's take a look. Try to flatten this out for you. All right, so my zipper is right here. My zipper is facing down on the bag. My cork is facing towards my canvas here. My handles are down on both sides while my handle's facing down. I've clipped my raw edges all the way around the top. I'm gonna stitch this 1/4 of an inch. Then I'll show you how to add your lining, and we're going to do a different seam allowance for the final step. So this is how it's looking so far. I did my 1/4 of an inch seam. I have my zipper top basted down. So I'm going to leave it as is. I am not going to flip it up right now. I've got my handles here. I've got my zipper in place. I don't need to do anything with that. What I'm gonna do is take my lining piece and put this entire outside in the lining. So I'm just gonna, this is why I didn't iron anything, because I am just squishing this to death. So we're gonna tuck the handles, the top, all of it in. This is going to look like your normal bag at this point. We don't see any handles, we don't see any zippers or anything. I'm just looking at the interfacing of the lining, and this is my outside. So on this one, I do have my gussets to line up. So I'm going to kind of line those up, and I'll press the seams in opposite directions so that it's a little bit less bulky. So my outside seams seem to be going out, my lining seams are going in. And then I'm gonna come over here. I'm gonna do the same thing. Push that in, line it up, and now just clip all the way around the top. All right. Now your pleats should line up, but if they don't, it doesn't matter. You really can't tell. So if anything is a little bit off, if we have to add extra pleats, that's fine. But if our pleats, like on this side, for some reason, my pleat on the outside and the lining, they're not totally lined up, it doesn't matter. It's totally fine. All right, so far so good. Half clipped. There are clips everywhere. I don't know about you, but I think I lose more clips in one day of sewing than I can buy because they're just flying everywhere. They fall off my table. They're under the machine. They're everywhere. But one of these days I'll go around and pick them all up and I'll have a whole new supply. All right, so there it is. Final seam. This is going to be a 1/2 inch. So here is my little trick, because again, I want to make sure everything is in place. Nothing is going anywhere. I don't want to lose anything. I don't want to lose a handle or the top. So instead of trying to do a 1/2 inch seam, which is kind of hard because I don't have a 1/2 inch foot, I'm going to do a 1/4 of an inch seam, and then I'm going to sew a 1/4 of an inch from that 1/4 of an inch, because 2/4 equals a 1/2. Then I will sew this 2 times. This is the main seam. I will catch everything and we'll be good to go and ready to turn it right side out. So that is how it's looking. There is my 1/2 inch seam. Yes, it's messy. No, I don't care. I did my 1/4 of an inch all the way around. Then I went back and I did a 1/4 from that 1/4. So I have my 1/2. So now I'm going to turn this right side out, and I'm going to do this off camera because it's so big. I really need to pull it closer to me. All right, I started it off camera. It's just really hard when you can't hold it next to your body. I did open the hole that I left in the lining just a little bit more, which just proves my point that you can never leave a big enough hole in the lining. So I ended up going just a little bit bigger. It's probably about 12 inches now, but it's fine. It's still on the straight part, so it will still close up fine. So I'm just gonna take a look, trim some threads, kind of work my way around. All right, keep working, checking everything. I'm going to close the opening in the lining, so I'm just gonna be checking the top here. I'm gonna just kind of fold this over. And my bag is really, really stiff between the canvas and the Decoville light. If you have your iron nearby, use your steam and kind of warm your bag up, and that will help to soften it and make it easier to turn. But I'm just checking Everything looks awesome. I'm super happy. So now that I'm all turned, the last thing I need to do is close up the hole in the lining. I do that on the machine and I just fold my edges under, pull them together and stitch about 1/8 of an inch. And that's it. There is no final top stitching. We are done. So I will be right back. It's finished. Yay, I'm so excited. I have not made one of these in a while. I had a class over the weekend and somebody was making one and it just inspired me. And I wanted to do a video on this for a while now. It has been on my calendar for a couple months now, but you know, things happen, things come up, but it is so awesome. My mom picked out the fabrics and the cork. I don't know if it's because she wants to take it home with her or not, but regardless, I have a new sample and it's pretty awesome. So there is my Getaway Extra Large Tote. Let's take a look inside. I've got pockets everywhere, zippered pockets, divided pockets. I've got a double zipper closure, my handles, it's all set to go, and I'm super excited. I can't wait to see how yours turn out. Thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you like videos like this, don't forget to hit subscribe, click the notification bell, and give it a thumbs up.